Well, hello, good evening. Welcome to the GOE's prep session here with Bexley Seabury. This is the first of a couple of sessions we'll be doing. The next session will be on December the 9th, time to be announced, but it will be a time not with me and other students, but with Duncan Ely, who is the Executive Director of the Board of Examining Chaplains. He'll be able to give you some history and background and context for the GOEs. He'll be able to give you some insight into how the questions are put together. And most of all, he'll be able to answer any questions that you have about the GOEs, about the ones that are coming up, about historical GOEs. And again, the whole task of his time, your time with him, the whole task for tonight is to lower your anxiety and to help you feel familiar and comfortable with the GOEs, what they're going to be looking for, and how they operate. So welcome. We're really pleased to have you here tonight. I see a few people coming in from WebEx, and I want this very much to be interactive. I wonder if you might introduce yourself just briefly. Matthew, would you go first?
I'm Matthew Moore, and I am speaking to you from Brooklyn, from the Diocese of Long Island, and a longtime friend of Susie Colby's, who was kind enough to let me know about this.
Excellent. Thank you. Welcome. And Carolyn.
I'm Carolyn Rosen, and I'm typing in from Montana.
Excellent. Welcome. Very glad to have you here. And did I see Maggie as well?
Anne here. I don't know if you can hear me.
Anne. Sorry. Okay, great. I just wasn't seeing you on the screen. Hi, Maggie. Welcome. We see you. And where are you? Tell us about yourself. I can't hear you.
Can you hear?
Yes, now I can.
All right. I'm in Minneapolis. Hello.
Excellent. Great. Welcome, Maggie. It's great to have you here with us tonight. And we have some Bexley Seabury students at various stages here as well. On my right is Steve, and then Aaron, Drew, and Lily. So there's going to be a fair, and we also have people joining us from Facebook, and people will be joining us later with a pre-recorded session. So welcome to all of you. I intend for all of us who are present, either via WebEx or physically present, I intend for this to be an interactive session. And so I've got some things to say and to talk about, but please stop me at any point that you have a question or you want some more information or you want me to clarify something. This is intended to be very interactive. So there are two documents that we'll be looking at tonight, and I understand that I'm able to share this screen. On the one hand, we have the document which I hope you've all gotten a copy of before, which we'll just spend some time talking through strategies and perspectives on the GOEs. And then a second document is actually the general ordination exams from last year. And there are a few things in particular we'll be looking at here, but then we'll be just running some of the questions as a kind of a mock exam. So those are the two things that we'll be looking at tonight. And then I hope also that you'll again share your big questions, that we'll be able to get to them all before we're done here tonight. I intend for us to finish probably around 9 or so, but we can go a little bit later if we have that kind of work. And of course, if you need to leave earlier, leave when you have to. I will just say welcome, Dave. I'm seeing Dave Jackson. Tell us just a little bit about yourself, Dave.
Hey, guys.
Hey.
So I'm joining from not nearly as far away. I'm sitting in my house in Aurora, which is in the western suburbs.
That's great.
It's just tomorrow's going to be an early morning for me.
Well, right.
So yeah, I'm in the process here in the Diocese of Chicago. And I think I know many of you, but those I don't, it's nice to meet you.
Great. Good. Welcome, Dave. Glad you could be with us. All right, so I thought we might just take a quick look here. Then I'll go back to share screen, and we'll spend a little time looking at some general advice and overview for the GOEs. Again, so my first bit of advice to you all is manage your stress. Don't freak out. The biggest hurdle I've found historically with the GOEs, and I took the GOEs myself, so I was around a bunch of people taking the GOEs. I spent some time marking the GOEs early in my ministry, and I spent time with students helping them prepare ever since about 2009, and I'm convinced that the largest task that you have is just not freaking out, keeping it all in scope. And so here's the thing. The GOEs are meant to test your competency, not necessarily your brilliance, you're not writing a doctoral dissertation, you're not breaking new ground, but it's intended to test your competency in certain areas, and certain areas that most of you have been studying for years at a time, and maybe even, and have a great deal of tacit knowledge of as well from before your time in whatever seminary or training program you're a part of. And so again, the questions are meant to be answered. They just test your competency, and you've been studying them for them for years. And so again, I think that there's a great deal of very good reason to go in with a kind of quiet confidence. Again, you know this stuff. You've got this. So a part of that then, too, in particular, as you prepare for the exams and not freaking out, is simply don't cram. You might want to go back and refresh your memory from some notes from your first or second year. Skim through them, refresh your memory, but don't spend hours and hours cramming and trying to memorize large swathes of information, trying to reread all the books that you read while you were in seminary, or perhaps, as might be the case in one or two instances, read all the books that you intended to read during seminary. One has heard stories. That's not going to help you're not freaking out. That's actually going to probably stress you out more. It's going to fill your time and is not going to be a very good use of your time. So the best way I have found, though, to prepare for GOEs is simply to go back to previous exams, read through them, get a sense of just what it is they're going to be asking. What kinds of questions do they ask? What sorts of things are they looking for? How have the exams been done in the past? So that when you get to the day and you get the exam, you're not going to be surprised and say, oh my gosh, I never imagined it would be this kind of a question. So part of what's so scary about Alfred Hitchcock films is that the really scary thing is very rarely seen. And so by actually looking at the GOEs, it takes the Hitchcock out of the process of taking the exams, because you can look at it and say, that's the kind of thing they're going to be asking me. That's the kind of thing it is.
The MacGuffin.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, yeah. Ordination might be the MacGuffin for some of us to get through seminary. I don't know. But good use of vocabulary there, Drew. Well done. By looking at them, by familiarizing yourself with the kinds of things that they're going to be asking, the scale and scope of the questions and the responses you have to give, it's going to pay a lot of dividends. And then I also found it helpful in doing that to take a couple and just kind of outline your answers. And I've got some tips here for analyzing questions and structuring your response that we'll spend some time working through tonight as well, that I think will also be helpful with your studying and you're looking at the prior GOE questions. So, don't cram, review previous GOE questions. As I mentioned, manage your stress and anxiety, let people know what you're going through, plan some time away. There's this year, it's a 3-day exam with a morning and afternoon question each of the 3 days, but but it's actually over 4 days, and so one of the 4 days is a day off. So make sure that you plan some time away, whether that's just going out for a walk with a loved one, or spending some time zoning out watching an old movie, or whatever it is that really is recreative for you. Plan to do that, and don't plan to sort of finish all your cramming so that you've got it all in place. Because again, one of your major tasks is just managing your stress, and that'll be a big part of it. So even as you go up to the exams, it might be a good idea, to go out for dinner maybe with a loved one, hang out with friends, go out and see a movie, something like that the night before, so that you're not going in completely stressed out. So as I mentioned, there will be 6 essay questions, the GOEs this year. Each of them, so this is really important actually, each of them is intended to be answered in an essay of about 1,000 words. That's really about 4 pages double-spaced. It's not a whole lot, but the thing is, each of the essays at 1,000 words is intended to be answered in about 2 hours. 2 hours. The thing is, they give you 3.5 hours for each of the essay questions.
All in a day's
What? So each day, this is, okay, thanks, Drew. This is a valuable question. Each day, each of the days has two questions that you are to respond to with a 1,000-word essay. So you write two 1,000-word essays in the day. In the morning, you've got a 1,000-word essay. In the afternoon, you have a 1,000-word essay. But again, the idea is the questions are intended to be the sorts of questions that, with the kind of background you already have, you're able to respond to in about 2 hours with 1,000 words. But they give you 3.5 hours. So if you freak out, if you you have a computer malfunction, if you can't find a resource in your collection, don't worry, you've got some time. So anyway, so I think, again, I think that's important to bear in mind, just for context, to know, okay, well, I mean, the question is intended to be, is not intended to take up every possible minute, but, it's a couple of hours, it's 1,000 words. It's also important here, too, to recognize that this year, again, the responses are open resource. In the past, it's been closed resource or limited resource. Last year and this year, the GOEs are open resources. That means you can use any book, magazine, pamphlet, skywriting, anything you find on the internet, whatever, in your response, right? It's all fine, and you can use that. It's basically open book, like an open book exam. So that means a couple of different things then. First of all, with an open book exam, it can be easy to sort of get lost in the details and think, oh my gosh, it's open book. That means I have to write a really huge response, and it has to be super detailed. And so you actually can get lost trying to find every possible detail that you could include, and it actually becomes a bit of a burden because you're constantly reading and rereading and bringing in another source, and I remember something from over here, and I'm going to go and look at the Syriac background over here, and I have, I'm going to bring in this Hebrew verb, and I don't know Hebrew, so I'll study a little bit to make sure that, and it just, you get in over your head really quickly, and so with limited resources, it can be very stressful because you need to be able to remember things and think on your feet. With open resources, it can potentially be stressful in a way that's a little surprising, because you need actually to be able to manage your time and manage the scope of your essay in such a way that you're not bringing in everything you possibly can just because you have access to everything you possibly can. Okay, so bear in mind the scope is still 1,000 words. It's and we'll talk a little bit more about the general expectations for the GOE responses in a few minutes. But again, it's 1,000 words. It's good general knowledge on the basis of a seminary education. It's not breaking new ground in the area. So first of all, then, manage your time with your resources and don't get in over your head. Second of all, though, always be sure to cite all the sources that you consult. Always be sure to cite all the sources you consult. That sounds really obvious, but that means not even just a direct quotation, although certainly always, every time, cite a direct quotation. But it also means anything that is not quoted directly, but you got the idea from, it's better to overcite than to undercite. Of course, if it's your own thinking, you don't need to footnote that, or you don't need to find someone else who said it to give you a warrant. If it's your own thinking, it's your own thinking, and that's perfectly fine. Lily?
In citing it, are we doing it just like a paper where you would use a footnote and then put the citation on the bottom?
Yeah. So I don't think they have one accepted means of footnoting, the GBEC, but basically it can either be, you put in a footnote and put the bibliographical information at the bottom of the page, or you do something like parentheses, author's last name, comma, page number, close parentheses, and then put a bibliography at the end. Either way, the important thing is just to show your work so that people know, okay, I'm not making this up, I found this here, these people argue this sort of thing, and also I'm not borrowing this from someone else. So it's just a matter of being able to show your work in a clear way. And I mean, the people who mark the GOEs have all sorts of things that they're concerned about, and usually the exact style isn't it. It's just a matter of, again, being able to show your work and be accountable that way. So don't get lost in too many resources. Make sure always to cite anything you use, whether direct or indirect. And then finally, as you're preparing to take the GOEs, create a small library that you'll have near wherever you're going to be taking them. If you're taking them here at Bexley Seabury, there will be some resources around. If you're taking them at home or wherever, have Bible, prayer book, approved hymnals, maybe the Oxford Dictionary of the Christian Church, a couple of theological and biblical resources, one volume sort of commentary on Scripture. These are things that if you don't have, they wouldn't be so bad to have, but you could also probably get them from the library and just have them on your desk so that it's not a matter of seeing the question and then stressing out and saying, oh my gosh, I have to run down to the library, and then you're sort of scanning through the stacks trying to find the right kinds of resources. Have a good library of general resources, books you're familiar with, books you've used already in seminary, or whatever your training program is, that you know that you'll be able to dip into and get some information quickly. McGrath's Christian Theology would be good for theology. Various liturgical resources that you've used. The commentary of the American Prayer Book from Aaron Hatchett would be useful potentially.
Do you have a
Steve?
listing of those books?
I don't believe I included a listing of those books. There are some available online, and I could also make a listing of those resources available and send them out. But again, my only hesitation in doing that is I don't want to indicate that there are certain standard resources that you must have, and you have to have Fout's library or else you're not going to do well. Rather, depending on the program you've been in and the resources you've used, go with what you know and with what is familiar. But I'll be glad to send out some suggestions if you'd like.
Basic liturgy or historical theology, but we should have
That's exactly
probably
it.
a sufficient list of
And I would not want to suggest you buy something new, you become familiar with something new. I very much want to suggest you already have a lot of resources and just use those because you already know them. But yeah, I might send out a listing of possible resources just as examples, not as a prescriptive list. Go out and buy these 5 books kind of thing. Good. Are there any questions up to that point? Anyone out in WebEx land? I guess I should be scanning down here. Okay. So we've already looked through here. Manage your stress, 6 essay questions. Responses are open resource. Now, some general strategies for responding to the questions. These might seem really obvious. I don't know. I hope that they're useful. Most importantly, I thought I had. Here we go. Most importantly, read the entire question. I've heard stories of classmates who read the first half of the question and said, I know, and then dove in and started writing the question, and they got about 3/4 or more done, and then they realized, wait a minute, and they went back and they read the question, and they're like, oh, wait, no, there's all this other stuff that needs to be done. So the first thing you do, read the entire question. And when you do that, be clear in what it's asking. You need to respond to the question being asked, not respond to the question that you associate in your mind. If they're asking about this, then respond to this and not that. It's as simple as that. So first of all, read the entire question. Second of all, notice the parts of a question. Is it a question with 2 parts, with 3 parts, with 5 parts, with just 1 part? That's really an important cue. And you're going to want to make sure that the structure of your response matches those parts and is able to take into account each part of the question. Are you responding to the whole question? So first of all, know what the question is and what it's asking. Second of all, respond to the whole question, and in particular, note how many parts it has. And again, some of the parts might be larger than others. There have been some in the past that have asked for, they were slightly longer than 1,000 words on this and 500 words on that. So again, just pay attention to the question that's being asked and make sure that you respond to that. So thirdly, what specific elements are expected in the response? This is related to the question about parts of a question, to the point about parts of a question, but make sure that you include everything that's being asked for. And we'll look at some specific examples here in a few minutes to see kind of how that works. And I've included one here on the page as well. So read the entire question. What are the parts of a question? What are the specific elements expected in a response? Does the question ask for a pastoral response to a particular person or group? So in other words, are they asking for what would you say to these people? You have this group of lay people in a Bible study. You have this group of people who are involved in the community but not involved in the church. You have the vestry. Is there a particular audience that's being looked at that you're expected to respond to? Or is it more a matter of to provide a reasoned exploration of a topic? Write an essay about 1,000 words in which you explore this or that. And these are important because they'll be looking for the way in which you can communicate accessibly to people who are non-specialists, or the way that you can, not in a really technical way, but without necessarily stinting. How can you communicate the substance of a matter in a way that we've learned at the Master of Divinity level to analyze a topic. So again, it's just a question then of what's the audience of your response, and are you making sure that you're tailoring your response, how you're responding, the language you're using to that particular audience. And then finally, take some time to think through your answer. And again, I've heard stories of people who just kind of jumped right in to responding. Maybe it's because of anxiety. Maybe they were just really eager because they really knew a lot about this material. But I think it really pays to take some time, brainstorm a little bit. Maybe do a mind diagram if you brainstorm that way. Jot down some ideas. Come up with an outline so that you don't get in kind of over your head, just writing, but have some structure, have some planning in your response. That's also helpful for when you get 2/3 to 3/4 of the way through and maybe you're getting a bit tired and you can say, okay, so here's where I am in the response that I've planned. I have this much more to get to, rather than saying, I feel like I've written enough, that's probably fine. So you probably all know that. It's probably a fairly straightforward point, but I find that it's always just really, helpful to remind ourselves, take your time, think through your response, really invest some time, because that time that you give to it beforehand will pay you dividends as you respond. Okay, so those are 5 specific steps that I would encourage you to take as you look at the general ordination exams. There's some more general advice that I would say if you're reading. First of all, look at the rubric for the question. That rubric is going to tell you in some detail exactly what's looked at, what's needed for a proficient response. I can hardly tell you, friends, what a difference this has made in taking the GOEs. The students last year expressed it really clearly that this seemed like a real sea change. And so we'll look at a rubric in a little bit more detail a little bit later. But basically, what a rubric is, it's almost like giving you the answer. Here, I'm just going to, so I'm sharing my screen now. Actually, I can go to this other document. So looking here at the general ordination exams from last year, this is the rubric. So they give the question. In this case, it's a scripture question. And then they set out what they're asking over here, write an essay of about 1,000 words, etc. But then after that, they say, look, this is how we're going to be assessing this section of the exam. So what criteria are they going to be using? Well, they have a criterion around exegesis, and the exegesis needs to contain all 3 required elements. They have a criterion around the application to concerns of the group. So, there's this is related to exegesis of the scripture, this is related to the pastoral concern, and then this is the use of additional Holy Scripture.
Is that asking for additional Holy Scripture that speak to the same topic that the Ezra books are? Is that?
Each element, thank you, Drew, each element of this this rubric will correspond very closely to each element of the question. So in this case, write an essay. The essay should demonstrate an awareness of literary, theological, and historical context of the passages that are given while addressing the concerns of the group. This is the exegesis of the given scripture. This is the application to the group. Use of additional Holy Scripture. This relates to this last part of the question. Bring in at least 2 other scriptural references, one of which must be from the New Testament, to support your essay. And so this third rubric is specifically addressing this part of the question. Yeah? Does that help?
Yeah, and this is a sample question anyways.
A sample question. This is a sample question from last year, yes.
Yeah.
This is on last year's GOEs.
So, I'm seeing that the topic here is that the group is struggling with the role of an outsider that pertains to these 2 passages. So
Okay.
you would bring up a New Testament passage that also speaks about the role of the outsider, right? Is that what's...
You could. I mean, it depends on the particular perspective you take on these texts, I think. But yeah, exactly. Because there are a number of different ways that you can work through the texts. My larger point, though, was, of course, about the rubrics here. And again, this is all new for 2016. It's going to be included in 2017 also, and it gives you really clear, these are the criteria that it's going to be judged on, but then also, to write a proficient essay, you just need to do what's here in column 2. In some ways, they're really anticipating exactly the kind of response you need to give. It's brilliant. It also means that there are no hidden expectations. There's no sort of subtext, did they get the hint, the secret hint? Do they know the secret handshake? There's none of that, because this is exactly how your exam is going to be assessed. No surprises, nothing hidden. It's really great that way. We'll come back and look at these a little bit more in a few minutes. I think that that's a really important part of how you approach and tackle your response. And so I think it'll be worth spending a little time on that. Okay, I've already mentioned this before, but if you cite someone else's words, you must cite them. The Board of Examining Chaplains says that you must cite all sources, etc. So just do your homework, show your work. Okay, we've also talked about open resources. Again, don't get lost in the thicket. Proofread. This sounds maybe obvious, but it's important. Partly just because if you've left out a verb in something you've been writing, or maybe you used a word that's similar to the word you wanted to use, you could actually be communicating something very different. Most of us don't need to proofread for spelling and maybe for grammar, that sort of thing, as much, because the word processor does it for us. But it's even more important then to go back and proofread for sense to make sure that you're saying what it is you want to say. It'll also just be a way, kind of spiritually, emotionally, psychologically, of closing the door on that work and saying, this is done, I'm happy to send this in. And then finally, your response needs to show proficiency. And that's the kind of proficiency that someone taking the kind of preparation program that you're undertaking, it's just intended to show that kind of proficiency. It's not a scholarly paper. It's not a dissertation. It's not intended to be published. It doesn't need to be overly technical. Even the ones that are just asking for an essay and not for you to respond to a pastoral situation, they don't need to be overly technical, filled with jargon and sort of in-group language. In fact, it's commonly observed that people with PhDs in the areas that they're being assessed on will often not sustain that area. So I had a colleague when I was in seminary who took the GOE at the same time as me. He had a PhD from Princeton. I mean, not sort of a marginal place, right? In New Testament, he didn't sustain the scripture. It's because through his PhD, he was taught to analyze material in a certain way and provide a certain particular perspective on it. And so he was working up here when the MDiv students who sustained it perfectly well were working down here and giving this kind of thing. I don't know that I didn't read his particular response. I just remember that all of us were amused and also commiserating with him that he didn't sustain the area that he'd kind of dedicated his life to. But I've constantly heard stories of this. And so again, don't think though that you need to give a response sort of above the level that you've been working at for several years. You're just meant to show proficiency in the work you've been doing up to this point. Okay, so what I'd like to do now is to spend a few minutes looking through some particular questions and coming up with some responses. So just before we dig into that, I would like to look at one other thing, and it's over here. I'd like to zip back up to the top. So we've already looked at the rubrics for each individual question, but this is a scale of general criteria, and I think that this is also important to understand what are they looking for. And they say that papers are weighed with the following in mind. And so first of all, perception and analysis of issues. Do you understand what the issues are? Do you understand what's being asked? Secondly, application of resources. Third, demonstration of knowledge. And lastly, articulation of views. So this, of course, means also that it's not just a demonstration of knowledge without any of your any articulation of your views. It's also not just an articulation of your views without any demonstration of knowledge or application of resources. It has to be all of these at once. And so again, it's important to build in some balance for that. But more than that, we can go on and say there are only two potential assessments. The first is proficient. The other is not proficient. But a proficient response, the response that all of you are going to be giving, is marked this way. The response gives evidence of a sound and perceptive understanding. Not groundbreaking, not necessarily cutting edge, not it has to be sound and perceptive. It has to be an understanding of the basic issues raised by the questions. Again, it doesn't need to be groundbreaking. You're not doing a PhD. But you need to understand the basic issues that are raised by the questions. And you also need not only to understand the basic issues, you need to know how they relate to the canonical area being tested. And very often, in particular, you need to be able to think laterally about pastoral application as well. Written presentation, you need to write as clearly as you can, and you need to organize your response. Again, taking the 5 steps that I've laid out is going to be a big help in organizing your response. And it's looking for apt use of source material. Again, it doesn't have to be exhaustive. It doesn't have to be scholarly. It has to be appropriate use of the right kinds of source material. So, and then not proficient, again, is just a response that's assessed as being lacking in these areas.
How is it? How does the point system work? How is it scored?
So the scoring is done by, in the past was done by a team of, there were 3 people who read each exam, and a team of 2 of those 3 who would together agree at an assessment for it that was then passed on to the 3rd person who served as a chaplain. If they were marked proficient, then they were simply passed along. Any responses that were marked not proficient had to be agreed by at least a 3rd person, and then if there were multiple non-proficiencies, they were passed on usually to another subcommittee of people who would take some time looking over and seeing, is there some bias in the assessment of it? Are there other relevant factors, that sort of thing, to give it every possible chance. And so the examining chaplains, I think, tried to build in a lot of kind of fail-safes. There are still people who are and were critical of the work. It's not my job to either criticize or defend at this point, their work. But at this point, the church has decided that these are still worthwhile exams, so I'm just trying to help you prepare.
So, remember the last year group did exceptionally well?
Yep.
If I remember.
Yeah, all of our students sustained.
Is that not?
Well, because the exam changed somewhat, particularly with the rubrics, the inclusion of the marking rubrics, you almost can't quite compare. It might be slightly apples and oranges. In the past, though, yeah, we've had people who haven't sustained one or more areas. But yeah, last year we're really proud to say that all of our students sustained all the areas. And again, I think that the inclusion of the rubrics was a really major part of that, and should be a really big help for all of you in your work, I think. Yeah. Are there any other questions at this point? Any questions from WebEx land? Oh, right. Okay. I'm very sorry about that. Yeah. That's. Thank you very much, Maggie. Is there a particular question that we were responding to that would be helpful?
No, I got it from the content.
Oh, okay. All right. Yeah, yeah. So no, you're right. Quite right to ask, and thank you. We'll make sure that we do that. Are there any other questions then? Yeah, Steve.
Yeah, one of them is they mentioned a couple places the 1,000-word limit. How tight are they on that? I mean,
Well, so typically you'll find that they'll give you a clue, and so if you look at, so if we were to turn here to, sorry, Steve's question was how tight are they on the 1,000-word range? So I'm going to share the screen here. We'll go, this is the scale of general criteria we're looking at. That's right at the top of the GOEs. Here, if we look at Holy Scripture, they're going to say, write an essay of about 1,000 words. And I think we'll find as we look through that, for in the next section, Christian theology, an essay of about 1,000 words. Set 3, an essay of up to 1,000 words. Set 4, we'll say a 1,000-word essay. The next set 5, about 1,000 words. So take that seriously. I'm sure if they're saying up to 1,000 words and it's 1,002 words, I mean that's not one of the rubrics. They're not going to mark you down on that. If you give them a 5,000-word tome, they're probably going to be pretty aggrieved, and who wouldn't be, right? Just write your roughly 1,000-word essay and call that good. Because actually, if you get into 5,000 words, you've just done too much. You're not responding in the right sort of way to the kind of question that they're asking. They're not out to get you with, oh my gosh, it's 1,002 words. There's no way he could possibly be ordained. That's not right. That's not the game. That's not the game we're playing. And indeed, the most important things, all the things that they're going to be marking, you see here in the rubrics. And again, that's just a really important thing to have in mind. Is that helpful?
so I was just thinking of your example where somebody was writing this and then they got 2/3 of the way through and they said, "Oh, I need to cover this other thing." So if they went to 1,400 words, would that be, or should they have rewritten?
You should probably go back and do some rewriting. Or actually, what you should do, just make sure you plan it out in advance, so that you have your plan in front of you, and you get to about 1,000 words, and you've done exactly what you're meant to do. So that's what I would recommend. Yeah, I mean, again, I don't think they're going to throw you out if you do 1,400 words, but basically, if they're asking for 1,000 words, it's intended to be answered in about 1,000 words. So that should be fine. And if it's 980 words or 960 words, again, as long as it's adequate and meets the conditions of the rubrics, all's good. Yep.
Could I ask just kind of a boneheaded technical question about this?
That's okay.
If we're looking at the 1,000-word count,
Yep.
can we exclude from that the words that occur in our bibliography if we provide one?
Yes. Yeah. Right. So Okay, Matthew. Thank you. Matthew's asked the question whether the words in a bibliography are going to count against the limit. I think that you should not worry about the words in a bibliography. I think that it's going to be perfectly fine. The idea is the response. You're not giving extra paragraphs and footnotes and that sort of thing. But it's not. They're not out to get you with the number of words. They give you a number of words because people have spent entire careers answering these kinds of questions, and you don't have an entire career. You have 3.5 hours, and it's intended to be done in 2. And so 1,000 words gives you an idea of the scope. but it's not intended as a criterion to get you out or something. And
I wasn't concerned about that. But,
okay,
journals, when they give you a word count, they often do want you to include the bibliography in it because they're looking at the amount of page space.
yep.
I presume that was not what they were thinking here.
Yes, no, quite right, Matthew, and thank you for asking. And yeah, I do enough journal work to know. Yeah, actually, when you're putting words on a page and you're shipping it out around the world, the words matter. But in this case, it's more a guideline to you all so that you know the kind of scope of response you're supposed to give. Because the difference between a 1,000 word essay and a 2,500 word essay would be a big difference, and you're meant to give the 1,000. But if it ends up being 1,200 words or 900 words, they're not marking you down or up for that. They're simply gauging the adequacy of the response, and that's gauged on the basis of the rubrics that they give you. So, yeah. Anyone else? Any other questions?
Just a couple technical questions.
Yeah, good.
I'm assuming that wherever we take this, that we show up with our own computer, and then the questions will be emailed to us. And will we print them out, or can we print them out? And our answers we produce on our own computer using our own word processor,
Yep.
and we email that to them. How's that all work?
So all the specifics will be determined by the site where you're taking the GOEs. It's proctored by various sites. I don't know if all of you will be taking them here at Bexley Seabury. I suspect not.
I'm set up at home.
Okay, so we have some folks doing it at home. We have some folks doing it here. You'll get the information in advance, and it will all the information will be from your proctor, whoever is proctoring the exam for you. So I don't have all the specifics, but also the specifics might shift slightly from place to place. So yeah. But
that's the general.
Absolutely, yeah. And you can email Ron Fox if you're taking them here at Bexley Seabury and ask for those specific details.
Ron has the list that he's taking.
Okay. Yeah. Yep. Exactly. So. So as far as the proctoring questions and everything, you can certainly ask Ron Fox, and there will be more information as well on the Board of Examining Chaplains website. Good. Anything else before we
How long
crack on?
do the results come in?
Typically, results are returned sometime in February or early March. You can imagine it takes a while to assess them. Usually the Board of Examining Chaplains meets in late January, and then you'll get the results sometime in February or in early March.
I was hoping it'd be before I go to London, so I'm not biting my nails the whole time.
Oh, no, that's okay. You people have existed on less than nail bitings, and so you'll be just fine. So good. So if there's nothing else, I think we'll move on then. So I had wanted to spend the rest of our time analyzing some actual questions from last year. Now I pulled apart one of the questions, as it happened to be the theology question, sort of my area, in the document that I sent you. And sorry, there's a question coming in from Facebook. This just in from the coast. Wait, which coast? Bear with me.
Any recommended resources to have at our fingertips?
All right, excellent. So, so the question is, are there any recommended resources that we might have at our fingertips? An excellent question. As I mentioned before, I'm happy to send out a list of possible resources, but Steve, I wonder if you might actually even respond to this fellow this way. I would, again, encourage you, more than getting new resources, to simply use the old resources that you already have, you've already read, you've already taken notes on, you're already familiar with, rather than coming up with something brand new. In general, I will say that people have found, and it's been around a long, long time in several editions, the Oxford Dictionary of the Christian Church to be, at times, a fairly helpful resource just for some general knowledge. It can be fairly expensive, I think, unless it's in a new edition. And so if you can get a copy from the library, that might be especially helpful. So thanks very much for that. Okay, so in the document I sent out, I kind of took apart and went through step by step the pulling apart the theology question. Since I've already shown you how to do that, and I suspect you probably read through that, I wonder if we might take some time and look at, is everything all right?
I was making sure it's charging right.
Thought we might look at a couple of other questions from last year's general ordination exams. And so I thought we might spend some time looking here at Christian ethics and moral theology. So I think what I'll do is I'll walk us through step by step, looking at this question, working through each of the 5 steps that I've recommended, including looking at the rubric, and just sort of give some guidance along those lines, and then we'll end by looking at set 6 on Christian worship, and I'll give you all a chance to sort of do the work on your own, and then we can come back and have some conversation. I understand for those watching afterwards, it might be a little different kind of a dynamic. Are we okay? Thank you. Excellent. Right. So first of all, let's look then here at the Christian ethics and moral theology question from last year. So it starts off, according to the 79 Book of Common Prayer, the baptized promise to follow and obey Jesus as their Lord. So there's a baptismal promise of obedience. But then also those who are ordained to the diaconate and the priesthood promise that they're willing and ready to obey their bishop and other ministers who may have authority over them and their work. And so the question is asking about 2 forms of obedience, baptismal and ordination obedience, as we find them in our theological and liturgical resources. Basically as we find them in our life together as a church. It goes on, obedience has been described in many ways that articulate differing aspects or perceptions of the concept, considering the following 2 quotes. And it's interesting that they don't give the sources for the quotes. That's probably not terribly important because they're not making anything of it. They're just presenting them as 2 perspectives on obedience. Later on in your spare time, you can Google the quotes and find who said each. So a 20th century Christian mystic has written that obedience is the only pure motive, the only one which does not in the slightest degree seek a reward for the action, but leaves all care of reward to the Father, who is in secret and sees in secret. So, as we look at it, we see this is a quotation that it seems pretty heavily in favor of obedience, obedience of a certain very robust form. And then secondly, the views of a contemporary artist have been characterized with the following words: all the world's problems stem from obedience. War, genocide, slavery are products of such silent compliance. If the first quotation was setting out a very positive perspective on obedience and really very robust sense of obedience, this quotation is setting out almost the exact opposite perspective, that indeed all the world's problems stem from obedience, and it names some, and indeed its likening, we'll notice, obedience to silent compliance. All these problems are the products of such silent compliance. So, that's an interesting equation right there, something we might possibly suspect might be true, or something we might want to push back against a fair amount. But again, it's just noticing that we see 2 very strongly contrasting views of what obedience is. So here we get to what the question is asking. In an essay of up to 1,000 words, so 1,000 words or so, provide an ethical definition of Christian obedience that takes into account promises of baptism and ordination, explaining how obedience is viewed in Christian life and ministry, as set within the Christian tradition of moral reflection. And, secondly, on the next page, address each of the above quotes, describing how obedience in Christian life and ministry is the same as or different from what is suggested by the phrase silent compliance. Okay, so what do we have here? Our 5 steps. First of all, read the question. What's it asking for? Well, the question has given us some background from Christian life, particularly baptism and ordination, some background on the notion of obedience and its role in our life. In light of that, it's also given us 2 diametrically opposed quotations, seemingly diametrically opposed, certainly strongly contrasting, quotations characterizing obedience and its role or otherwise in Christian life, or indeed perhaps in the second case, any authentically human life. Okay, so we're noticing that, and then we have to respond to that. So the parts of the question. So part 2 of our strategy, first of all, read the question, read the whole question. Second of all, as you respond to the question, notice the parts. Well, we notice obviously that we have 1,000 words, up to 1,000 words, but there are specifically 2 parts. So that's going to suggest, again, a 2-part structure to your response. And since it doesn't really give you any particular clues, you're probably going to think, well, probably about 2 500-word responses, 2 500-word sections to your overall essay that you're writing. In the first part, and again, this is just to think about it, analyze it this way is going to help you then to come up with an outline. You notice, okay, so you've got 2 parts. So maybe you've got section 1, section 2, but then section 1, you'll notice you have to provide an ethical definition of Christian obedience. That definition has to take into account promises of baptism and ordination. And you have to explain how obedience is viewed in Christian life and ministry. Now, the baptism corresponds to Christian life, ordination to ministry. So saying Christian life and ministry is not accidental, it's correlated with what you have before. And then as set within the Christian tradition of moral reflection. So I think for that, what they mean primarily is, are you looking at sources for your ethical definition of Christian obedience that are based, in Scripture, in the theological tradition, in the spiritual life, something from the prayer book? Are you using some particularly Christian response? Or, are you drawing from the Bhagavad Gita or a secular literature of one kind or another? What kind of a case are you making that's specifically a Christian case? Is everything all right? Okay, excellent. Sorry, just checking on my colleagues over here. So that's your first section. And again, those are the different parts of the first section as you approach it. But then secondly, it's asking you to address, and this is important, each of the above quotes. And so it's expecting you to say something about both quotations. You can't just glom onto the second one as either correct or incorrect and neglect the first one. You also can't just big up the first one as though the second one doesn't exist or it's obviously wrong or whatever, and I'm not going to touch on it. Rather, it's specifically asking, address each of the above quotes, describing how obedience in Christian life and ministry, in other words, take what you've done in this first section, address each of the quotes, and particularly relate it to this phrase, silent compliance. And so it's asking you both to look at both quotes, address each of them on the basis of what you've done in the first section, but it's also specifically asking you to respond to a phrase that's found in the second of the 2 quotations. Okay, so first of all, read the whole question. Second of all, notice what kind of parts you're going to find there. Third of all, what are the elements that they're asking for? I've already anticipated this somewhat. They're asking for an ethical definition of Christian obedience. It needs to be rooted in the Christian tradition, and it needs specifically to interact with baptism and ordination as examples of Christian life and ministry. And then also in the second section, again, we've already noticed this, but is asking you to look at both quotes, but it's also specifically asking you to weigh in on this phrase, silent compliance. So even if you love the first one, you think the second one is ridiculous, you really need to be able to weigh in on that silent compliance quotation. So the fourth point in my sort of 5-step method is what kind of response are they asking for? Are they asking for kind of a script that you would give to a vestry person or someone studying for confirmation? Or are they just really asking for an essay? Well, actually, they give it to you right here in an essay of up to 1,000 words. And they just say, provide an ethical definition, address each of the above quotes. There's no sense here of a particular context of needing to address certain particular people. So you're just kind of free to go about your business, write your essay, addressing these questions directly, rather than worrying about what will the well-read layperson understand by what I'm saying here.
No hypothetical audience.
No, not in particular. Well, except maybe the Board of Examining Chaplains and their readers, which consists consists of people who are working with this and have some resources. So you don't need to worry about it as much.
Would
Sorry.
there ever be a question that would have a contextual,
Audience?
well, yeah, or just a contextual bit about it that you would need to address?
Right. Okay. So Lily has asked the very good question whether there actually, I've been talking about this and the questions we've looked at have not had this specific. She's asking whether there will be a contextual clue, and in fact, I think we see that in the next one that we'll be looking at, set 6, Christian worship. It starts off, you are preparing to instruct a group of parents whose children are to be baptized during the Eucharist, and so you're to write an essay, actually, which provides a written teaching. But there are, and so that gives you a little bit of a clue. There's another one, though, earlier on, the very first one we looked at, actually, on Scripture. There's a Bible study group in your parish, and the essay that you're writing will actually form the basis for a presentation to the Bible study group. So again, that gives you a strong contextual clue of what this response might be for.
But should we shy away from, should I shy away from, well, I'm talking to the chaplain board, I'm telling them what I would say to the Bible study group, or should I be a Bible study group? This is this. The specific question is, are you talking to the Board of Examining Chaplains, or are you talking to the Bible study group? I think in general, when they give you contextual cues like that, it will be important that you show that you are able to communicate clearly and accessibly to a non-specialist the kind of things that you know. So again, it's a question of lateral learning and being able to make connections with people who might not be a specialist. So I hope that's helpful. Yeah.
Can we begin answering the question directly? Like our opening line is a definition, blah, 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 blah,
Yeah.
and start going with
Yeah.
answering
Yeah.
the question. So we don't need a flowery intro.
No.
We don't
Yeah.
need
No.
like a
Flowery.
well-written,
Yeah.
beautiful
Nope.
thing. Okay.
Yeah, no, thank you. It's an excellent question. So in case you didn't hear, it was just the question of, do you need like a flowery or general sort of introduction? Well, it's often the case that people find that they're really struggling to understand Christian obedience. I have often found this to be the case, and in fact, I had a small group once and that reminds me of another story, and then that sort of thing is really completely out. It will be mostly padding, and particularly in a question like this, where they're just asking you to address them directly and to respond to the question. The best policy is absolutely address them directly and respond to the question. So thank you. So really shy away from this kind of general introduction or trying to tie it into other things. It's actually just, you're supposed to respond to the question as it's put there, and that's perfectly fine. And they'll understand. You're not, again, it's not a piece of literature. It's not a general essay that will be read in the New Yorker or something. It's, basically you're just responding to the question. Yeah.
So what resources do you go to? Where do you go next?
We'll get to that in a moment. Because I'll tell you, so we've already analyzed part 4, what kind of response they're looking for. It's not a particularly pastoral one, it's just a direct essay. So 2 other steps I would want to encourage. Number 5,
you've gone through these 4 steps. Now sit down and create an outline, or at least brainstorm a little bit about what your response is going to be. And this actually addresses your question, Steve. Steve asked, so what resources then should we go to at this point? And I'll get to that in a moment. But what I actually first want to say is, before you dig into any resources, what you do is, having pulled apart the question, analyzed it, gotten clear what it is they're asking, what they're looking for, you sit down and brainstorm your response. And the reason is, so this is in test-taking strategy, this is a powerful strategy called pre-phrasing. Pre-phrasing. This is valuable even on multiple choice questions. But the whole idea is, you're reading the question, and you're then, on the basis of what you already know, responding to the question. Instead of saying, oh my gosh, yeah, I read something about obedience once, and going and getting Dorothy Soul, for example, off the shelf, and looking through her and trying to find a few apt quotations, and then jotting them down, and then trying to think, oh wait, what else were they asking? Again, because this is an open resource exam, that might be a real temptation. Again, resist that temptation. You've been studying for this for years. You know a lot of stuff already. Sit down, brainstorm. What do you want to say? What do you need to respond to? What do you already know? That's also, so it's going to be helpful partly because you're not going to get distracted by what other people say. Because other people, whether it's specialists like Dorothy Soul or whoever, other people aren't specifically responding to this question that you've been given. But secondly, you already know a great deal about it, but if you can lay out what you want to respond to it, then you get a notion of, oh, there's this one little section on silent compliance that I don't necessarily know much about. I might want to find something about that. And so rather than dashing off and starting to do your research without a clear idea of just what it is you're doing, the strategy you have, the direction you're going, instead, by setting all that down, I mean, you might have the whole answer actually right there in front of you. I wouldn't be surprised to know that you did. And then maybe you just use some open resources to fact check a few things. That would be ideal. But if you've been able to pre-phrase your answer, to lay out what you want to say, and you see that there's an area where you don't necessarily have a whole lot to say, that will give you intent in your dealing with the open resources. You have a particular question that you need this resource to help you with, rather than going and getting lost by reading more and more on something that might actually be peripheral to your response. So outline and brainstorm a response, pre-phrase what you want to say, and only then draw in, draw in resources. And so again, I'll just say that again to re-emphasize it. It's open resources, it's open book, but make the resources work for you. You're not working for them. Okay? So they need to pay their way. They don't get free rent in your essay. So make sure that you have a reason you're bringing them in. It's not just ornamentation. It's not just to give credibility to your essay. It's to show something. They're working for you. So again, just a strategy with regard to the resources. Okay, so those are the 5 points. The 6th one that I would add, after you have come up with an outline, after you've brainstormed, or maybe even at the same time, go to the rubric, which is given to you to check. And again, this is, we looked at the other rubric early, and we noticed the one for Scripture, and we noticed that there were 3 sections. Again, that's a really powerful clue to you to say, I'm going to need to have this in the essay, I'm going to need to have that in the essay, I'm going to need to have this other thing in the essay for it to be a decent essay. So we might just go, and before we start writing, take everything we've done at this point, the first 5 points, and check it against the rubrics that we have here. So what's the rubric that we have? I'm just going to zip down here in this document that I'm sharing with you. So first thing we might notice, first I'm going to zoom out a little bit so we can see as much of it as possible. So the first thing we might notice is that, hey, look at that. There are 2 sections to the criteria. And we notice, wow, we thought that there were probably going to be 2 sections to our response. This is a really good confirmation. Actually, yeah, they're looking for 2 sections. And what are you doing in the 2 sections? You're asking for definition of obedience, and then you have to respond to the quotations. Well, hey, presto, that's exactly what we were already thinking about doing. And so this is really important confirmation then that you're on the right track. So what is a proficient essay in this area going to do? Well, it's going to provide a definition of obedience founded in the Christian tradition of ethical and moral reflection. Hey, unsurprisingly, that's more or less just restating a major part of the question, because of course they're assessing you on how you respond to the question and not whether you know a secret handshake. Secondly, the definition takes into account the promises of baptism and ordination that specifically refer to obedience. And again, as you're looking at your outline for your response, you're going to want to say, okay, I have a section with it where I'm going to give a definition, but what am I going to say about baptism and ordination? How am I going to make sure that they're included there? And then the definition explains how obedience is or can be viewed within Christian life and ministry as set within the Christian tradition of moral reflection. And again, we're just noticing that actually the work we've already done seems to be drawing this in, and so we're already then on the way toward a good response. If we got to a point where we said, actually the essay we put, the outline we put together has this definition of obedience, and it talks a little bit about baptism and ordination, but I didn't actually do this, this is going to be an important clue that actually we need to add another section to this, another part to this first section. So again, I'm really encouraging, go spend some time with the rubrics. It's going to give you exactly what you're going to need to have a proficient response. We might also notice that it's not saying, you have to draw in this external resource. You don't have to go into this other thing which was only sort of hinted at in the question or really wasn't there. It's actually just assessing whether you responded to the question as it's given. In the second section, the essay responds in a thoughtful way to both quotes. So this is important because, first of all, you need to respond to both quotes. But again, we notice that. But then it's also suggesting a thoughtful way. So don't just restate the quotes. Don't just repeat what is being said in the quotes, but expand on it. Show your thinking on this matter. Why does it matter? What difference does it make in the life of a Christian? How else might we say it? Okay, so that's the first part of the second section. And then finally, the essay describes how obedience in Christian life and ministry is the same as or different from what is suggested by the phrase silent compliance. For those of you following at home, I might just add, it's different from the phrase silent compliance. But this is actually important though for the essay because in fact, so my snarky comment aside, in fact, this essay is not assessed on the basis of whether you provide a right answer, and right is defined in some way which is external to the question. It's actually, because you can take one side, it's the same as, or it's different from what is suggested by this phrase. You could actually argue that it's exactly the same as the phrase silent compliance. You could argue that. And then it's a matter not of, well, they got the wrong answer, but rather, what evidence have you mustered to support your point? How can you describe how Christian life and ministry might be understood in some sense by the phrase silent compliance? And how have you made your case? And this is important. Again, this might feel for many of us like a fairly straightforward example, almost like an unacceptable option and an acceptable option. But generally speaking, if you're given this range of possible responses, then they're not sort of trying to trick you into responding one way or the other. It's a genuine option. And it's not a question of whether you choose the reader's favorite one. It's a question of how do you support the response that you are giving.
You could be a fence sitter on these as long as you explain why you're weighing in the nuance of it.
Well, yeah, I wouldn't suggest a fence sitter, but you could say that there are important elements to either, and you need to understand, it might not be the phrase silent compliance, but possibly silent compliance doesn't get at the whole range of obedience and these sorts of things. You might, as my friend Tom Ferguson and Krusty Old Dean did, You might tease apart the difference between obedience and submission as one way of approaching it. I mean, there are all sorts of different ways you can do it. Again, it's just a matter of thoughtfully engaging with the quotes, giving each some place, and specifically responding to this phrase, silent compliance, either by suggesting that it's different from, but it might not be totally different from, and that's where you get the nuance, or perhaps the same as the phrase silent compliance. And again, I'm just wanting to emphasize there isn't a hidden agenda. There isn't, when you're asked for this sort of thing, there isn't a right answer that you have to give, otherwise you're going to be drummed out of the process. It's rather giving you the opportunity to make a case, and they're looking more at how well do you make your case, how well do you bring the evidence, what evidence of thoughtfulness does this show. In fact, I mean, you might, depending on how you're feeling on the day, you might actually argue against the perspective you would usually take if you thought that that was just simply the best essay that you could write at the time. Because again, they're not interested in, you know, what are the inner workings of this person's mind, and you know, they actually think the phrase silent compliance really describes you know, the Christian life or something. They're just looking to see, you know, can you make a clear, accessible, well-based argument one way or the other. So that's, I wanted to walk through that particular question and just kind of tease it apart. And then here, once you have the, to go back to Steve's question, you know, once you have looked through the rubric, once you've examined the outline that you put together, you're brainstorming, the structure of your essay, the mind map, or however it is you approach it, then you're going to sit down and think, okay, what resources do I need? Rather than just saying, well, I'm obviously going to need a whole lot of resources and, you know, get sort of the whole stack of books over here. You're going to say, you know, what am I going to need? What's going to help me? And then you get whatever resources you need. You start writing your answer, and then make recourse to those resources as you need them. So is that helpful, Steve? Yeah? Are there any other questions at this point? Well, anyone from WebEx land?
I'm giving you silent compliance.
Oh, very obedient of you, Matthew. Okay, well, that's lovely. We have about, on my clock here, somewhere around a half an hour left. I thought we might take some time. Why don't we take 10 minutes, and we will look at, here, I'll go back to sharing, and I'll show you so that we have it at home. You might have it in front of you as well. We'll look here at, wait, Jaime, do they all have this at home? Okay, they've all received this? Okay, so great. So let's look at set 6, Christian worship. We'll take about 10 minutes or so. Go ahead, you know, work the method, use the 5 or 6 steps, look at what the rubrics are, come up with an initial response, and then we'll come back together in 10 minutes. In my time, that's going to be 8:40. That'll be 20 to the hour, and we'll discuss it and see what you found and how you want to go from there. And then we'll have a final wrap-up time where we can answer questions, and we'll be done. Okay? Wherever you care. That's fine.
Somebody. Did you look in the fridge?
We only have.
Yeah, that's people's private stuff.
You could make noise.
Troy Dad says it's almost like the brokers come down already for it. Yeah.
You read the answer?
Yeah. No, not the answer. I'm breaking it apart and brainstorming now. I'm going through the 5 steps.
I feel like you didn't even, like, the steps are already kind of done.
I mean, it tells you right there what,
Yeah, they're right here.
I don't know how to tease out anything.
Yeah.
Each of the bullets. Very straightforward.
Well, this is informational. Perfect.
Oh, it is him. It's red. I'm used to red being the. Oh, there you go.
Lily. You need it in there too.
I'm gonna make it him.
I don't,
Bad side, right?
no, you're on my good side.
So you did hear that.
I don't hear much, but I did hear that. Oh, this thing is on, isn't it? Never mind.
We can take these in with us, can't we?
What? Yeah, of course. Yeah, it's open resources. Yeah, that includes the stuff I provided. Although Kevin Beasley last year suggested if it's open resources, I want to take in Dr. Fout. I'm not saying that's impossible. I'm just saying I'm not cheap.
Oh, really?
No. We have about 2 minutes. Yeah, 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 I saw that. Okay, so I have that it's 22. So it doesn't need to be a complete response, but this is just giving us a little sort of communal experience in tackling it on our own. And so the steps that I recommend are, first of all, read the question, read the entire question. You've all done that. But secondly, we might ask, what are the parts of the question? And who would like to weigh in on that? Are you noticing that there are parts of the question in particular? Lily?
I split it into 4 sections. I had words of thanksgiving, the words of thanksgiving over the water that inform our understanding of baptism.
Okay.
As one section, and then coming up with one lectionary text for the occasion chosen and how it relates to baptism. I didn't actually answer that one. I didn't get to it, but
Sure.
I think that would mean like there's like 4 times during the year that like Easter Vigil.
Yep.
Why you would like if I picked Easter Vigil, why would I pick Easter Vigil?
Exactly. Why are those particularly fit for baptisms?
Yeah.
Yep.
And then 2 or more ceremonial actions.
Yep.
And then identifying a hymn that is significant for baptism.
Yeah.
Or the prophets of the day.
Yeah. Excellent. For those of you at home or on the recording, if you weren't able to hear what Lily was suggesting, she's suggesting that actually these 4 bullet points in what the question is asking ideally give you a 4-section answer, with each section responding simply to each one of the things being requested. And I think that that's exactly right. The first one, you're just going to look at specifically the words of the thanksgiving over the water and our understanding of baptism. We'll get to that in a moment. Secondly, we'll look at the lectionary texts. Thirdly, the ceremonial actions. And then finally, a hymn of our choosing and its significance. Yeah, well done. I think that's exactly correct.
I think it's important to pay attention to the numbers. That when you read the question, to write down 2 or more.
Exactly.
Or 1,
right.
I think that you can get tripped up if you don't.
So the times when I was reviewing exams, assessing students' exams, some of the saddest times were when people didn't, when you were assessing a response and people hadn't paid attention to this, and so they give you 1 when the question was actually asking for 2, or they gave you, maybe it was asking for 3 or 4, and they didn't do that, and so yeah, again, this is a key point, Lily, and thank you for that. Go back and notice specifically what are they asking for, and in this case, the numbers in particular. Identify one of the lectionary texts. You don't have to do more than 1. Describe how 2 or more ceremonial actions. You don't have to do more than 2. You could do if you want to, but you must do at least 2. And then identify a hymn, one hymn of your choosing,
and just make sure that you exactly hit all your marks there as far as what's being requested. I think that that's exactly right. Well done. Are there other, that actually gets us quite a ways into the specific elements. Is there anything else that people particularly noticed about the specific elements being requested that might be, need to be slotted in among these four parts?
Well, it does say major liturgical and theological dimensions.
Okay, right. So, so you need to touch on the liturgical and the theological dimensions. I think in these four sections, you'll particularly hit on the theological in the first section, first two sections with the lectionary text and the thanksgiving over the water, and you'll sort of naturally do the liturgical with the ceremonial actions. I mean, in one sense, it's all theological and liturgical, but you do absolutely want to make sure that you are also hitting both throughout, right? Okay, so good.
Also to keep in mind, you're writing this with an out-of-town sponsor.
Thank you very much, Drew. That actually gets us on to the fourth point that I usually make. What's the mode of response? What are you being asked to write? And so Drew noticed that it starts off with, you are preparing to instruct a group of parents whose children are to be baptized. So you're talking to parents, not children, but you're also specifically addressing this written response to an out-of-town sponsor who cannot attend the preparation sessions. That's right. So it's not just a kind of essay in which you're responding directly to the question, but it's something that's very specifically intended to be an accessible pastoral account of what's going on in baptism, what's our understanding of it, here are some of the resources and what they mean. Yeah, well done. I think that's a key point. Oh, sorry. I'm hearing a question.
Yeah, about with contextual questions like that.
Yes.
How conservative are the people who are looking at these essays? Are they looking for kind of an ability to bridge the gap between the church and the not church, or are they looking for us being able to effectively say exactly what the Episcopal Church wants?
Well, that's a good question. I don't think that's a question of being conservative or not conservative, but I think, in this case, they're interested in, it's specifically laid out here in terms of our understanding of baptism. And so, clearly, setting out our understanding of baptism and what it means might be very appropriate for someone who's unchurched. You're at least sort of laying bare the logic of what it is we're doing and what we think is going on and that kind of thing. But primarily it's just a matter of, can you articulate what we believe, what we're about, what we do, and what it means. So they don't specifically say, and it might be that an out-of-town sponsor is not an Episcopalian. I don't know specifically if they might not be baptized, but certainly in terms of pastoral, realistic pastoral situations, it's possible they're not baptized. So it might very much be both and. But primarily what we're looking for here is, and again, this is just attending to the words of the question, how do the words of that we pray over the water, how do they relate to our understanding of baptism?
I think they'd be looking for what you said, a pastoral response to, or a pastoral message to, whoever.
Yeah, to someone who's presumably interested enough, at least, right, to be committed to seeing this person through to a mature commitment of Christian faith. That's right. One other little element that we haven't quite touched on yet is our understanding of what baptism means. How would you go about that? Because they're making a connection. They're not just saying, what does Thanksgiving over the water mean, but how does it inform our understanding of baptism? And so you need both to be able to analyze that, but connect it to our understanding. Where would you find that? Or where could you find some resources for finding it?
I did that, what was the technique you called it? Pre-phrasing? Is that what you said?
Yes, that's exactly what I said, pre-phrasing. That's right. Thank you.
So I thought of off the top of my head, Thanksgiving over the water and general baptism and the sort of whole sweep of what it means sort of theologically from my understanding and what I've read. And I just came up with a short thesis which was just made new in community.
Okay.
And so I tried to think of the liturgical actions I'd want to explain that would emphasize made new in community, and I would want to like string that through the hymnody that I would choose and everything as I'm like writing.
That's brilliant.
The
Yeah.
example of that.
Yeah. Good. So I tried to swing the mic around here, but just in case you didn't hear that, Erin was saying that she specifically prephrased her response to this in a certain way, but then on the basis of what she was going to say about our understanding of baptism, she then ran everything else through that. So this is going to result in a really well integrated essay. That's right. So if you were looking for some specific language around our understanding of baptism, you might also look in places like the Catechism of the Book of Common Prayer, and the language that it's full inclusion into the life of the church, that it's dying and rising with Christ, and these sorts of things. And so that gives us some very specific language by which to lay out what is our understanding in the Episcopal Church of what baptism is. So yeah.
When then submitting this section 6, let's say your bibliography only included the hymnal and the PCP, would that look too unlearned? Because I know you don't want to go overboard.
No. As long as it's an adequate response to the question, there's no reason to pad it out with some double-barreled resources. So it just needs to be adequate. I mean, if you use the BCP and the Bible or something, just quickly mention. Yeah, I mean, I use the BCP, this page. I used the NRSV, whatever. So again, you're not just sort of going off the top of your head. But yeah, you don't need to sort of beef it up with resources from somewhere else. Yeah.
Now, when a question like this says specifically explain how the words of the Thanksgiving over the water, BCP,
Yep.
306, 307,
Yep.
do they want you to go to those actual words?
Oh yes, yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, so it,
I mean,
yeah, so it's
that is somehow incorporated.
they're saying very specifically, and they're not asking you to quote the words at length and put the whole prayer in. That's not what they're asking. But yeah, I mean, they're not just asking about the service in general. They're not asking about the exorcisms. They're not asking about the baptismal covenant. They're very specifically. They're not asking for the collect of the day, the salutation. They're very specifically asking for the words of the Thanksgiving with the water, a very particular prayer, and how does that relate to our understanding of baptism? So you need then to go to that and set the other stuff to the side because that's going to be extraneous.
I wonder if I just realized it. I wonder if they got those questions that we just asked.
Which ones?
If they got those questions.
Right. Right. Thank you. So, for the sake of posterity and for the sake of those, on all the ships at sea. Sorry. The question was about I specifically identifying the Thanksgiving over the water in this question, and I was just how important is that? And I was just re-emphasizing that it's asking about a very specific prayer, which means that it's asking about that prayer and its language and not any of the other prayers. And so it's very important then to specifically, respond to that question about the Thanksgiving over the water and not the exorcism, the baptismal covenant, the Eucharistic prayer. You can set all that to one side as a distraction in the case of this question. It's specifically looking just at the Thanksgiving over the water. So thank you.
One thing about this question, a strategy point that has come up in some of the GOE sessions that we've been having at the Mercer School in Long Island, which is where I'm preparing for
Right.
priesthood. One of the things that our instructor emphasized to us is to be on the lookout for places where they give you a choice.
Okay.
And to make whatever choice is going to make it easy for you to answer. So in this case, one of the choices they give you is which of the especially appropriate days you're going to pick
Right.
for pick the Easter Vigil.
Right.
Partly because the water has so much to do with sort of dying and rising with Christ, and so boom, there you are.
Exactly.
And not that that would be the totality of my answer, but that would it just kind of naturally lends itself.
That's absolutely right. I don't know if everyone heard, but Matthew's point was that that he's particularly learned in his prep work at the Mercer School that when you're given a choice, if there's one option that seems especially easy for you, go with it. And so he was noticing in particular with responding to this question, there are multiple especially appropriate occasions for baptism. But he found the Easter one just especially easy, you might say, just in terms of the images and so forth around baptism. And so, if you can use any one, go with the obvious one. Go with the straightforward one. Don't make extra work for yourself. And Easter is an excellent answer here. But it's also important though to be clear in your response that you are choosing one of the occasions. You're choosing Easter, for example, and here's why. Because it's a part of the question. So good. Thank you. That was helpful. So we've looked at some of the specific elements, and I especially wanted to point out that it's talking about our understanding of baptism, not a Baptist understanding of baptism or a ritual studies perspective on baptism or Essene Qumran baths or mikvahs or anything. It's talking about our understanding of baptism. Go to the prayer book, go to the canons, whatever. Prayer book is going to be much better than the canons for this particular question. But, to find our understanding of X, you can use those sorts of resources. Right. So the mode of response, point 4, Drew has already helped us to notice that it's meant to be a response to a baptismal sponsor. Thinking about an outline, I think we've already had a suggestion of one by noticing that there are 4 parts to the question, and our response ought to be in 4 parts. And so, it would be very easy then, again, to structure your a 4-part response in terms of the 4 parts requested. The other thing to notice then, point 6, after you kind of come up with an outline, brainstormed a response, and pre-phrased your answer by saying what you want to say about this, what you already know about it. Before you dash off and get any resources, look at the rubrics. And so let's do that. We'll just take a couple of minutes here in light of the thinking and the work we've already done. So the first is it identifies the theological elements of the thanksgiving over the water that inform our understanding of baptism. Well, hey, presto, that's exactly what the first part of the question is asking. There's no mystery there. A proficient response, we're going to notice, makes a connection between at least one section or line from this prayer. And again, that's important because it's not saying the whole prayer, everything that's said in the prayer, everything that could possibly be meant by the prayer. It's saying at least one section or line from this prayer. So it's giving you very specifically, this is the kind of thing we're looking for. It's not a mystery. And the Episcopal Church's understanding of what baptism means. And so again, that our understanding of baptism is an important part of your response. So the second, appropriate baptismal occasions. We've noticed this. This doesn't fit tidily into our 4-part response, but it's an important part of, thank you. Here, I'll just go back here. I think you have this in front of you at home, but just so we're all on the same page, literally and figuratively. Thank you, Jaime. So we notice that, we've already noticed that appropriate baptismal occasions is one part of the response, one element in a good response. It's probably not going to be a major heading in your outline, but you do need to make sure that you make a point about when is this going to be, why are those fitting occasions for baptism. And here's the interesting thing. If not one of the especially appropriate occasions, it explains the reason for the choice. And so there are certain sort of major feasts at which it's expected that there are going to be, all things being equal, baptisms. But it's also just allowed that baptism may be done on any occasion. The important thing here is not that you identify one of the 4 or 5 occasions, but that you give some rationale for your choice. And even if that's not one of the especially appropriate ones, they're allowing that. But you need to explain the reason for the choice. Okay, so those might be in your first section.
And we might notice here then, this is the second point, lectionary text for the baptismal occasion. Well, what is an adequate response going to do? It identifies the correct lectionary text for the baptismal occasion chosen. You go to the lectionary, you go to the Revised Common Lectionary, and find what's going to be read then. It's pretty straightforward, and it shows a connection between some portion of the chosen lectionary and baptism. Again, if we take Matthew's very good suggestion and go with Easter, Bob's your uncle. This is going to be really straightforward. Second section, done. Third section, ceremonial elements. The teaching describes 2 or more ceremonial actions in the baptismal liturgy. Again, it's Lily's point about noticing numbers. It's asking for 2 or more. If you want to do 3 or 4, that's fine. 2 is perfect. 1, inadequate. It explains how the chosen actions express our understanding of baptism. So again, we're noticing in particular that our understanding of baptism is an important element of the overall response. Now we'll notice here the inadequate one, it describes only 1 or no ceremonial actions. So you can omit this section, or maybe you'll do only 1. This is going to be inadequate. Or it doesn't explain, maybe it identifies 2 or 3, but it doesn't explain how the actions chosen express our understanding of baptism. Important to have both those elements in this section. So that's the third part of the outline. Lily has a question.
Yeah, with this particular one, I know we won't get this question, but are they looking for like symbolic actions or like with prayers, like saying the covenant?
I think
baptismal covenant, would that qualify?
That's interesting. I think you could probably okay, 2 things. You could play it safe and just use acts, actions, because it's acting about actions. Or if you wanted to describe one action, the pouring with water, and maybe something more broadly in action, like what were you going to suggest? Saying the baptismal covenant. Then if you're going to do that, you need to be really clear and just briefly say, although it's not usually considered an action in the literal sense, in fact, saying the baptismal covenant together is an action, and you have to go well beyond that and say, but it's important ceremonially because it connects with our understanding of baptism in this way. So, in other words, you would need to, again, just to play safe and not give hostages to fortune, again, probably identifying 2 specific actions might be best, but if you wanted to go that way, you at least need to acknowledge, I understand that you asked about actions. I'm construing actions in this larger way, and so bear with me as I show how this is actually an action and achieves what you're asking for. Matthew's suggestion about doing, when you have choices, doing the easy one, might be the best. So, sharing a candle, dunking with water, Bob's your uncle. There's two actions. Yeah, oil, exactly. And there are enough actions really in the baptismal liturgy that you've got your choice. You can work a little outside the box, but I think you need to be charitable to your readers and acknowledge that this might not be exactly this, but here's what I see. Here's why I'm using it. Yep. Okay, so we were looking then at the rubrics. So that's the third part of your outline, and then finally the hymn. This is the fourth part we've already identified. The essay chooses a hymn appropriate to both baptism and the lectionary of the day. We're choosing Easter. This is a hymn that's an Easter hymn, but also has baptismal imagery in it, and you explain why the hymn is appropriate. Again, an inadequate essay, it chooses no hymn, or maybe you choose a hymn, but there's no real explanation of why the hymn is appropriate. This is showing you sort of what you don't want to do over here on the right-hand column, but it lays it out pretty clearly for you. And so if you've come up with your pre-phrased answer, if you've come up with your outline, your thesis, and you're realizing, actually, what I was intending to do actually only paraphrases the prayer, or just quotes lines without actually showing how they explain or relate to baptism. If you recognize what you're going to do in this, that's a really good indication that actually I need to go back and make it more like the middle column instead of the right-hand column. So, and then after you've done that, you have a sense of what other sources you might need to go get. Your commentary in the prayer book, maybe, but maybe not. I mean, as Lily suggested earlier, This might be one you can answer just with the prayer book and the Bible and the hymnal, and that's fine too. But you go, you get those, you sit down, you write your answer, and then you submit it, and you go have lunch and forget about it. Great. Are there any other questions on what we've been doing here this last half hour or so with this particular question from the GOEs and the method that we've been looking at to tackle this material? Okay. I'm not hearing any. Then I'll ask. Are there any other general questions about the GOEs? Anything else that we can address that we haven't talked about yet? I'm also not hearing any. Maggie says, I think we've lost you all in the chat. Is that right? Is Maggie frozen? This is all being recorded for posterity, isn't it? Oh, there she is.
Can you hear us?
Can you hear us? I guess we probably shouldn't be saying that if she can't hear us, right? Because she wouldn't respond. Okay. So, Matthew, can you hear us?
I lost about the last 5 minutes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I'm seeing a thing.
Uh-oh. Oh, dear. Well, we're seeing you and hearing you.
We can't see you.
Oh, crud.
That's okay.
Okay. I could recover that material, or actually it's going to be recorded and available on our website. Is that right, Jaime? And so it would be a fairly simple matter. If you want to go, you can download it. You can look at just the last 5 minutes if you want to, and go back and see a best of highlights reel or something. I don't know how we're going to do it exactly. Anyway, thank you all for your time. Thank you for your participation, your good questions. I really appreciate this. This has been a little like sitting at the sitcom family dinner table, which has been a little strange, but it's been really great. Now, I've been really glad to be able to reach out and include all of you and also the people who will be watching on the pre-recorded video. So thanks all. Blessings and best of luck on the GOEs. I think you're all going to do great. You've been studying for it for a long time. It's all going to be fine. So thanks very much. Take care.